ISIS, ISA, Islamic State. After the Iraq War, the country was broken. Communities were angry, unprotected, and divided by sects. From the remains of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, a man named Baghdadi rebuilt something far more brutal, and he used the chaos as fuel. In 2014, everything changed. ISIS captured Mosul, a city of more than 1 million people, almost overnight. Thousands of soldiers ran. ISIS took billions in weapons, cash, and vehicles, and for the first time in modern history, a terrorist group claimed a full caliphate. Their power didn't grow by numbers alone. It grew through fear. They used high-quality videos, social media, and shocking violence to terrify enemies and attract tens of thousands of fighters from more than 80 countries. Inside their state, life was controlled by guns, taxes, checkpoints, and strict laws. They made money through oil smuggling, kidnapping, foreign donations, and taxing anyone living under their rule. At their peak, they controlled land the size of the UK. But their rise came with a massive human cost, millions displaced, ancient cities destroyed, and terror attacks from Europe to Asia. Entire regions of Syria and Iraq collapsed into war. By 2019, the Caliphate fell. Baghdadi died. Cities were freed. But the story didn't end. ISIS didn't disappear. It scattered. Today, they survive as hidden cells in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and across Africa. Weaker, yes, but still recruiting, still planning, and still waiting for chaos to rise again. That's the real legacy of ISIS, a warning that even when a state falls, an idea can still survive.
Al-Qaeda, let me walk you through Al-Qaeda, the group that changed global terrorism more than any other in modern history. It began in the late 1980s during the Soviet-Afghan War. Thousands of foreign fighters came to Afghanistan, and one man, Osama bin Laden, used that moment to build something new, a network based not on territory, but on ideology. Their message was simple but deadly: fight the West, fight its allies, and fight anyone who opposed their version of Islam. In the 1990s, Al-Qaeda grew quietly. They built training camps, formed sleeper cells, raised funds through charities, private donors, and smuggling. They carried out embassy bombings, the USS Cole attack, and then everything changed on September 11, 2001. The 9/11 attacks killed nearly 3,000 people and instantly made Al-Qaeda the most feared group on Earth. It triggered the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, the global war on terror, and a complete overhaul of airport security, intelligence sharing, and counter-terror laws worldwide. But here's the thing about Al-Qaeda. It didn't rely on one place. It relied on branches: Yemen, North Africa, Somalia, Syria, Pakistan. Each branch acted semi-independent, making the group harder to destroy. Even after bin Laden was killed in 2011, these affiliates kept the network alive. Today, Al-Qaeda is weakened, fragmented, and mostly silent compared to its peak. It lost leaders, lost territory, and lost influence to newer groups like ISIS. But it didn't vanish. Al-Qaeda still operates through regional partners: AQAP in Yemen, AQIM in North Africa, Al-Shabaab in Somalia, and small cells across Asia. They publish propaganda, plan small-scale attacks, and wait for opportunities to rise again.
Boko Haram began in the early 2000s in northern Nigeria, poor, ignored, and filled with angry youth. It started as a radical Islamic school under Mohammed Yusuf, preaching that Western education was evil. For years, it was more of a movement than an army, until 2009, when clashes with police turned into a full military assault. Yusuf was killed, and that moment became the spark. His followers went underground, reorganized, and returned under a new leader, Abu Bakr Shekau, a man known for brutal, absolute control. And from here, everything changed. They began attacking police stations, then markets, then whole villages. Kidnapping became their signature.
You may remember the global shock in 2014 when they abducted over 270 Chibok schoolgirls, one of the biggest mass kidnappings in history. By 2015, Boko Haram wasn't just a Nigerian problem. They were raiding across Niger, Chad, and Cameroon, turning the Lake Chad Basin into one of the world's most unstable regions. They used child soldiers, forced marriages, extortion networks, and suicide bombers, many of them young girls. Their brutality pushed over 3 million people from their homes. Then came the turning point. They pledged allegiance to ISIS, calling themselves the West Africa Province. But even that caused internal fights. The group split, one side still following ISIS, the other staying loyal to Shekau's extreme methods. Today, Boko Haram is fractured but far from gone. Their factions still attack villages, ambush soldiers, and recruit from areas with no schools, no jobs, and no hope. And even weakened, they remain one of the most dangerous groups in Africa, feeding off fear, poverty, and the absence of the state.
The Taliban. The Taliban rose from the chaos of the Afghan civil war in the early 1990s. Afghanistan was broken. Warlords controlled every road, and people were desperate for order. That's when students from Pakistani madrasas, led by Mullah Omar, stepped in with one promise: we will bring justice and safety. Many Afghans believed them. By 1996, they captured Kabul and created the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Their rule was strict, public punishments, banned schooling for girls, and absolute control. But one decision changed world history. They sheltered Al-Qaeda, allowing the network behind 9/11 to grow inside Afghanistan. The U.S. invasion in 2001 toppled them quickly. Many thought the Taliban era was over. But the group didn't disappear. They went to mountains, crossed borders, rebuilt quietly, and watched the Afghan government crumble under corruption and fatigue. They created shadow governments, collected taxes, controlled rural courts, and used classic insurgency tactics: ambushes, IEDs, night attacks. Every year, they gained more ground. And while fighting, they also negotiated with global powers. Their biggest win came in 2020 when they signed a deal with the US, gaining legitimacy without firing a shot. Then came August 2021. The Afghan army collapsed, city by city. The Taliban walked back into Kabul almost exactly 20 years after losing it. No other modern group has ever regained a whole country after losing it. But ruling is harder than fighting. Today, the Taliban govern Afghanistan again, isolated internationally, struggling with a crashed economy, internal power fights, and a rising ISIS-K threat. Millions face poverty, women's rights remain restricted, and the world is still unsure whether to recognize them.
Hamas. Hamas was born during the First Intifada in 1987 as an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine. It promised resistance against Israel, social services for Palestinians, and governance in areas neglected by the official authorities. Its rise was rapid. By the early 2000s, Hamas gained deep support in Gaza through schools, hospitals, and charities. In 2006, they won elections, taking political control from Fatah. But governing didn't stop their militant actions. They were launching rockets, digging tunnels under Israel, and engaging in armed conflicts that made headlines worldwide. Hamas operates on two fronts: militarily through attacks and defense tunnels, and politically by managing Gaza's administration. This dual role allows them to control daily life, influence elections, and maintain regional connections with groups like Hezbollah and Iran. The impact has been devastating. Repeated conflicts with Israel have killed thousands, destroyed homes, and left Gaza in chronic humanitarian crisis. Economically and socially, the region suffers under blockades and continuous unrest. Yet, Hamas remains a central figure in Palestinian politics. Today, Hamas still controls Gaza, continues to launch attacks, and negotiates indirectly with Israel through mediators. The political deadlock, humanitarian crisis, and regional influence make it a persistent force, one that reshapes Middle East dynamics every year.
Hezbollah was formed in the early 1980s during the Lebanese civil war backed by Iran. Its initial goal was to resist the Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon, but it quickly evolved into something far bigger. From the start, they combined two strategies: armed resistance and political organization. By fighting Israel, they gained credibility among Lebanese Shiites. Soon, they weren't just fighters, they became political players, winning seats in parliament and controlling local municipalities. Hezbollah operates on multiple levels. Its military wing is highly trained, with rockets, drones, and intelligence networks. Its social wing provides schools, hospitals, and welfare programs that win loyalty. Regionally, it acts as a proxy for Iran, influencing Syria, Iraq, and beyond. The impact has been enormous. They fought multiple wars with Israel, most notably in 2006, which reshaped southern Lebanon and northern Israel. They've supported Assad in Syria, clashed in Iraq, and maintained influence in Lebanese politics, often shaping government decisions. Today, Hezbollah remains one of the most powerful non-state actors in the world. Its military arguably stronger than Lebanon's own army. They are entrenched politically, armed to the teeth, and capable of projecting power across the Middle East.
FARC, Colombia. The FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, began in the 1960s as a Marxist movement. Rural communities, neglected by the government, were angry and desperate. Young farmers and peasants formed armed bands to fight for land, justice, and equality, or at least their version of it. Over decades, FARC evolved. They funded themselves through kidnappings, extortion, and the cocaine trade, creating one of the richest guerrilla organizations in the world. By the 1990s, they controlled swaths of rural Colombia, managing illegal coca routes and setting up quasi-governments in remote areas. Their tactics were brutal: ambushes, bombings, and mass kidnappings, often targeting civilians, politicians, and security forces. This 50-year conflict killed tens of thousands, displaced millions, and left entire villages destroyed. Colombia's rural regions became zones of fear and lawlessness. Despite decades of war, a turning point came in 2016 when the Colombian government signed a historic peace deal with FARC. Thousands of fighters demobilized and entered political life. Yet not all fighters disbanded. Factions continue to operate, running drug networks and occasional attacks, keeping parts of Colombia unstable.
ETA, Basque separatists. ETA, which stands for Euskadi Askatasuna, or Basque Homeland and Liberty, was born during Spain's Franco dictatorship. Basque nationalists wanted independence, and when peaceful politics seemed impossible, some chose violence. From the 1960s onward, ETA grew into a sophisticated militant network. They carried out bombings, assassinations, and kidnappings, not just in Spain, but across the French border. Their goal was to pressure the government while inspiring nationalist pride at home. ETA wasn't just violent, they also had a political wing. That wing collected support in Basque towns, helping fund operations and maintain legitimacy among local communities. Underground cells moved quietly, with cross-border networks making it difficult for authorities to track them. The impact was immense. Over 50 years, ETA killed more than 800 people, injured thousands, and created an atmosphere of fear in both Spain and France. Entire cities lived under constant threat, with security forces stretched thin and civilians forced to adapt to everyday danger. By 2018, after decades of peace talks, attacks, and declining support, ETA formally disarmed and dissolved. Their guns are gone, but the scars of decades of violence remain, and the history of this conflict still shapes Spanish politics and Basque identity.
LTTE, or Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, rose in Sri Lanka in the 1970s. Tamil communities faced systemic discrimination from the majority Sinhalese government, and young Tamils felt marginalized. The Tigers promised a homeland, a separate Tamil state, and a path to power through armed struggle. They quickly became more than a guerrilla group. By the 1980s, the LTTE had a full army, a navy, and even a small air wing. They eliminated rival Tamil groups, consolidating power and creating strict control over territories. Their methods were brutal and innovative. The LTTE is credited with inventing the modern suicide vest, often using young fighters or women in deadly missions.
They also conducted targeted assassinations, including the Sri Lankan president in 1993, and used child soldiers to maintain their ranks. Over 30 years, their civil war caused tens of thousands of deaths, displaced hundreds of thousands, and left deep scars on Sri Lanka's social and economic fabric. Villages burned, cities were bombed, and fear was constant. In 2009, the Sri Lankan military finally defeated the LTTE. Their territory vanished, their leadership was killed, and the fighters disbanded. Yet, diaspora networks and former supporters still exist abroad, keeping the ideology alive in some communities. The Tamil Tiger story is a chilling lesson in how a marginalized group can rise, innovate in warfare, and leave a legacy of both fear and caution for the world.
Al-Shabaab emerged in the mid-2000s after Somalia's central government fell, taking shape from the remnants of the Islamic Courts Union. Young men, disillusioned by chaos and poverty, were drawn to its strict interpretation of Sharia and promises of order. By 2006, Al-Shabaab began claiming territory in southern Somalia, imposing strict rule, running courts, and taxing local populations. Their media savvy was shocking. They produced propaganda videos, online messaging, and recruited fighters from across East Africa. In 2012, they pledged allegiance to Al-Qaeda, boosting their global profile. Al-Shabaab's operations are brutal and multifaceted. They control checkpoints, levy taxes, and secure key ports to fund their campaigns. They also target civilians and governments, carrying out bombings in Kenya, Uganda, and Somalia, killing. Al-Shabaab emerged in the mid-2000s after Somalia's central government fell, taking shape from the remnants of the Islamic Courts Union. Young men, disillusioned by chaos and poverty, were drawn to its strict interpretation of Sharia and promises of order. By 2006, Al-Shabaab began claiming territory in southern Somalia, imposing strict rule, running courts, and taxing local populations. Their media savvy was shocking. They produced propaganda videos, online messaging, and recruited fighters from across East Africa. In 2012, they pledged allegiance to Al-Qaeda, boosting their global profile. Al-Shabaab's operations are brutal and multifaceted. They control checkpoints, levy taxes, and secure key ports to fund their campaigns. They also target civilians and governments, carrying out bombings in Kenya, Uganda, and Somalia, killing hundreds and spreading fear. Their control over land has even worsened famines, disrupting aid delivery and agriculture. The impact is clear: millions displaced, regional instability, and a persistent threat to East African security. Somalia remains fragile, and neighboring countries continue to face attacks. Today, Al-Shabaab remains active, despite relentless pressure from U.S. drone strikes, African Union forces, and Somali military operations. Leadership has been targeted repeatedly, but the group adapts, survives, and continues its insurgency. Al-Shabaab shows how a group can exploit collapse, poverty, and ideology to rise, and why, even today, Somalia and East Africa remain on high alert. AQAP, or Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP formed in 2009, merging Saudi and Yemeni jihadist groups. Yemen's weak government and ongoing conflict created a perfect breeding ground. Young fighters, radicalized online and offline, flocked to their ranks, drawn by ideology and opportunity. They rose quickly, controlling towns in southern Yemen, exploiting chaos, and even setting up rudimentary governance. AQAP became infamous for bomb-making innovations, including attempts to smuggle explosives on airplanes. Remember the 2009 Christmas airline plot? That was them. Operations extend beyond Yemen. AQAP runs online radicalization networks, recruits globally, and has attempted multiple assassinations and attacks targeting Western interests. Their propaganda videos, manuals, and social media outreach have inspired followers worldwide. The impact is massive. International flight security tightened dramatically after their plots. Yemen's instability deepened, with civilians caught in constant violence, famine, and shifting control. Today, AQAP is weakened, losing territory to local forces and U.S. drone strikes, but they remain active, quietly plotting attacks, training militants, and leveraging Yemen's instability to stay dangerous.
IRA, the Irish Republican Army, or IRA. grew from Irish nationalism during the 20th century, fueled by centuries of British-Irish conflict. Its goal was clear: unify Ireland and end British rule in Northern Ireland. The IRA rose to global attention through bombings, assassinations, and guerrilla attacks. London, Belfast, and other cities felt the impact as civilians and soldiers were caught in the crossfire. The conflict became known worldwide as the Troubles. But the IRA wasn't just about violence. They also had a political wing, Sinn Féin, which negotiated ceasefires and represented nationalist interests in the political arena. This dual approach gave them influence and legitimacy even amid terror campaigns. The impact was profound. Over 30 years, thousands were killed, tens of thousands injured, and communities were torn apart. Fear, mistrust, and military crackdowns became daily life in Northern Ireland. Today, the official IRA has disarmed, following peace agreements like the Good Friday Agreement. Yet, splinter groups still exist, occasionally carrying out small-scale attacks and reminding the world that the legacy of conflict lingers. The IRA story shows how political grievances, when combined with armed struggle, can shape generations and transform nations even long after the guns fall silent.
PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party. The Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, formed in 1978 in response to systematic Kurdish suppression in Turkey. Influenced by Marxist ideology, they aimed for Kurdish autonomy and cultural rights. They began as rural fighters in the mountains, gradually expanding into a sophisticated network. Cross-border operations into Iraq and Syria allowed them to survive Turkish military campaigns and gain strategic depth. The PKK runs both military and political branches. Guerrilla attacks target Turkish forces, infrastructure, and occasionally civilians. Meanwhile, affiliated political parties work to influence elections and represent Kurdish interests within legal frameworks. They have also built regional alliances with other groups during conflicts in Syria and Iraq. The impact has been devastating. Decades of fighting have caused tens of thousands of deaths, widespread displacement, and refugee crises affecting Turkey, Iraq, and Syria. Entire communities live under constant threat of violence and instability. Today, the PKK remains active against Turkey, with operations continuing despite international pressure. Some countries label it a terrorist organization, while others engage politically, reflecting its complex regional role.
Lashkar-e-Taiba, or LET, formed in the 1980s during the Afghan conflict, fueled by radical Islamist ideology and the rise of militant networks in the region. Their original goal was to fight in Kashmir, promoting an extremist vision while training fighters in camps along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. LET rose in prominence through cross-border operations and local influence in Kashmir. They built infrastructure, recruited young militants, and gained a reputation for organized, disciplined attacks. Their training programs produced operatives capable of complex missions. Operations are highly coordinated. They conduct infiltration, bombings, and armed assaults, often targeting civilians, government institutions, and security forces. The 2008 Mumbai attacks cemented their infamy, killing over 166 people and wounding hundreds in one of the deadliest urban terror attacks in history. The impact is far-reaching. LET heightened India-Pakistan tensions, influenced regional security policies, and forced global counterterrorism strategies to adapt. Their attacks created fear, reshaped urban security, and drew international attention to militant networks in South Asia. Today, despite leadership restrictions and global pressure, LET continues to operate through aliases and splinter cells, remaining a persistent threat to regional stability. LET proves how a regional militant group can execute operations that ripple across the world, changing security, politics, and lives in a single coordinated strike.
Jamiah Islamiyah, or JI, formed in the 1990s, composed of Indonesian militants trained in Afghanistan. Returning home, they aimed to establish an Islamic state across parts of Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. They rose through strategic planning and religious schools, recruiting young militants and spreading ideology. Their ties to Al-Qaeda provided funding, training, and guidance, turning them into a disciplined regional network capable of sophisticated operations. Operations included bombings, coordinated attacks, and cross-border cells. They financed themselves through local networks, businesses, and sympathetic donors, while evading authorities by maintaining low visibility. The 2002 Bali bombings marked their deadliest attack, killing over 200 people and injuring hundreds more, shocking the world and prompting international counter-terror efforts. The impact reshaped Southeast Asian security. Governments launched widespread crackdowns, strengthened intelligence sharing, and introduced anti-terrorism laws. Communities lived under heightened fear, and travel and tourism were deeply affected. Today, many JI leaders have been arrested or neutralized, but low-level cells continue to exist, occasionally plotting smaller attacks. The ideology persists, reminding the region that vigilance is crucial. Jamaat Islamiyah shows how a local network, when trained, connected, and motivated, can become a transnational threat, leaving a legacy that shapes security policy decades later.